to our final conversation for today, where we promised we'd continue to keep the focus on the forests of Belize. International Forest Day is coming up on March 22nd, and all this week we'll be focusing on different aspects of why the forest is important to us and some of the common threats that our forests in Belize face, as well as some of the ongoing projects that we have partners who work on to be able to reestablish and save them. Today, we're going to be talking about forest protection and forest management. And here to have this conversation with us, we have Raul Chun, who is a forest officer at the Forest Department, and Heron Moreno, who is the executive director of the Corozal Sustainable Future Initiative. Good morning.
Good morning.
So why don't we start off by talking a little bit about who you both are and the work that it is you do within the Forest Department. So why don't we start with Raul?
Good morning. Thanks for the opportunity to be on your show this morning. Like you said, my name is Raul Chun. I'm a forest officer with the Forest Department. Been working with the department for the past 27 years, basically different levels and with different responsibilities. And one of my responsibilities at the moment is really to serve as a coordinating a person or officer as it relates to fire management in Belize at the national level, the regional level, and the local level.
Okay. And for you, Heron, tell us a bit about the program in Corozal.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Always a pleasure to be with you. Well, we manage the northern section of the protected area systems of the country. And so one of the programs that we have within our protection program, it has to do with fire management. And I think last year we saw a very good example of why that was important, no? Yeah. So apart from doing all the protection work, the patrols and the surveillance work and research and monitoring, fire management is also a very critical part of the work we do. So my role in there is to oversee the organization, and we have a team of about 40 people. And yeah, within that 40 people, we have a little brigade of firefighters or rangers that are involved in fire management.
Yeah. So we actually, I think it's interesting because we talk with the Met Service every day as we start the show to get an overview of the weather. And we know that around this time, they start offering what is called a fire forecast. Because this is the time of year where we see bushfires, as well as some of the fires that may have been unintentionally set, but from human error. Let's talk about some of the things that takes place that lead to the forest fires and the type of damage that it causes.
Okay, Marlene, on an annual basis, the fire season is actually observed from February 15th to June 15th. And really, this is like the driest part of the year. And we've seen, the accumulation of fires normally around these months. And really, fires are often started by people. Most fires in Belize are actually human-induced, either intentional or unintentional. But for the most part, I believe it's mostly intentional. It's really done by hunters, basically hunting for game species. Also done by farmers, basically preparing their land either for milpa or mechanized farming. People basically burning their yard trash. Land developers really who clear land and basically pile these organic debris and then light it up during the driest part of the year. Most of these fires, at least from what we can see, we observed last year, was that they were left unattended, unmanaged or uncontrolled, and basically that's what led to a high number of fires in a very short period of time. I recall, I think just around the start of the lockdown in April, we had a lot of fires ranging all the way up to like 143, 170 points that were registered on a daily basis for a very short period of time.
Raul, let me just get some clarity here, because you mentioned it earlier, and I know we've heard it in prior conversations. You say that the majority of fires are intentionally set. When we imagine forest fires, maybe it's relying on what we saw in cartoons or in movies. You think it's the sunlight causing it or the lightning causing it. But what's really behind these fires, and why do they get so out of control?
Well, like I said, people basically start these fires basically for their as a need, really. Need to get rid of debris, need to prepare the land for agriculture. However, when these fires are left unmanaged or unattended, they basically, if they're near forested areas, these fires basically then get into these areas and continues to burn day in, day out, and with broadleaf species, really it's hard to really get these fires under control, because the fire basically burns subterranean, and it has that that thick organic debris that continuously burns, and that is what we saw last year, and that caused a lot of damage to our forests and to our wildlife. And we
also caused health hazards too, because there was that thick smoke.
Yes, we had some very poor air quality last year. Actually, we have what is referred to as a purple sensor. It's an air quality sensor that is installed. We have one installed here in Baupan, and it registered some very, very poor air quality during those fires last year.
So let me, usually the year after a hurricane is a high risk year for fires because of all the fallen trees and dead limbs that are in the forests. We had some floods last year. Does that also lead us to a high risk year this year?
If I may.
Go ahead.
If I may. No, it actually can. And some people might believe that, everything was flooded, so then we won't. It's not so. It's not going to be an issue. But if you've ever seen an area where a flood goes through, after a few months, that entire area pretty much dies out, right? And everything looks pretty much dry once that water has receded and everything goes back down to normal. And so that vegetation is dead. And what it does, it actually converts into fuel. So that's also something to consider, and it's a good thing that you brought it up, because we still have to become very cautious. We still have to be very aware of that situation, because it still becomes fuel. It's dead wood, basically.
Wow. Okay.
And can we talk a little bit more about the impact of these fires, not only on the natural environment, but also on the communities of who may be living nearby fire-prone areas?
No, certainly. If I may, Mr. Chun, no, definitely. I think that's also something to consider. I think Mr. Chun brought up the fact that the fires are intentionally set. I would say they're intentionally set, not maliciously set, and that's where the difference is.
Yeah.
But a lot of these communities there are dependent on firewood as well, on the resources in the in the forest. And it's not only the wood, but there's also resources for construction. There's also some communities that depend there for game meat in some of these forests.
Mm-hmm.
I think,
Yeah, he
Heron
froze there just
froze
for
a
a
little
bit. Yeah. So, Raul, do you want to pick that up?
Yes,
Yeah.
like what Heron was alluding to was the fact that we have a lot of communities that are actually established in what we call like a forest urban setting, um, especially in the south where we have buildings made out of organic material,
Yeah.
thatch roofs and so on, wooden structures. These are not what we call fire resistant
Yeah.
material, and so when you have fires coming close by, that's when you see the actual impact of fires on property, on life. We have fires actually affecting farms, where I think we noted last year around Bamapan, an entire pumpkin patch, planting patch was basically disseminated, and this occurs all over the country, and really simple thing as putting in a fire line and actually having tools or assistance could easily help kind of put out some of these fires or manage these fires if the farmer would only take those steps in planning his burn.
So, historically speaking, the worst year we've had for fires is 2011, but 2020 was very prominent as well in the number of fires we had. And if we remember, although it's hard to think of anything other than the pandemic in 2020, there were some massive wildfires in Australia and in the Amazon, and we had our fair share here in Belize. How is 2021 looking so far?
Well, the outlook, based on the information from the meteorology services, it would seem that the temperatures for this year would be a little warmer than usual. I guess similar to 2020, while the rainfall would be normal to a little bit above normal, and these are for the months of March to May. Further down into the year, it gets kind of normal. So we may not see the number of fires as last year. Of course, these are just forecasts. Things can change.
Yeah.
Human behavior basically might take this for granted and just be careless. And so what we ask is that if you need to burn, basically take the steps necessary to actually before you burn, so that we don't see a repeat of what happened last year.
And you spoke earlier about doing things like for farmers, like having fire lines to prevent or to contain some of the fires that are started. What are some of the other things that people can do that can also reduce the greater risk for these fires spreading?
Well, farmers can actually, before they burn, get a permit from the agriculture department to actually, before they set their fires, the department would send personnel to inspect and approve their licenses if the preparation is actually done according to the expectation of the department. Farmers are also encouraged to clean at least 6 feet of fire paths before they burn their milpas or their farms.
Yeah.
It's good. It's a good idea to notify, the neighbors, especially if you have farmers that are neighbors and they have crops. You'd want to inform them so that they can take the necessary measure, also precautions to prevent the fire from getting into their land. Avoid, the burning during the hottest part of the day. We consider that to be anywhere between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. Why? Because the temperatures during these hours are high. The relative humidity is low, so ignition of any organic debris basically is quite possible. We also ask that you burn when there is very low winds. Wind really is an unpredictable factor. I mean, it can change. The direction can change rather quickly. The speed.
Which is why there's the forest forecast, right?
Yes,
to know when there are more ideal conditions or very dangerous conditions to attempt to start a fire.
Yes, but do recall though that fires create their own weather. So the general weather forecast will give you a good idea in terms of what to expect. But the thing is, on the ground, on the site, things can change really quick. So you have to be careful with that.
Let me get Heron back into the conversation, because one of the things I wanted to ask, the Corozal Sustainable Future Initiative is interesting because you are a protected area, but you are surrounded as well by people who work in farming. And so it does become even more, I'd imagine, the threats for that particular area are managed by community engagement. So tell us some of the best practices that you guys have implemented there to cut down on the situation of forest fires.
Sure. Well, one of the reasons why we're here with Mr. Chun is because we are a support system for government, right? And government has been doing quite a lot to engage communities and NGOs like ourselves. I mean, we are some of the new ones on the block as compared to some of our colleagues in the south, like Tide and Yashche. These guys have been in fire management activities for a long time. So they have a much more developed program of fire management than we do. But back to your question. So what we're doing is basically just working on the success that the government and the department has had over the years in working with not only the communities but NGOs in developing different approaches, right? And one of those things has to do, for instance, with developing fire management teams or fire response teams in different parts of the country, which is a program that Mr. Chun is also working on and has been contacting other partners. And what that program does is seeks to establish capacity within organizations like us, as well as in communities. Tide, for instance, and Yashare again have a very good program where they engage communities, and what they do is build capacity with community leaders so that they too are able to respond to different emergencies. So we are actually doing the same thing as well, right? So some of those activities has to do with, one, equipping our rangers and setting aside a group of dedicated rangers that are well trained and know how to handle that fire. And although we manage the protected area, we try to operate outside of that area because oftentimes the fire happens right outside, immediately outside along the boundary. So it's important that we work with communities and teach them, okay, these are the basic tools that you need to be able to suppress a fire. This is how you avoid a fire. And then we put different plans in place, like encouraging them to form a group, a community group, and try to offer them the training so that they can then respond to even a community fire, right? Okay. And that's why the fire equipment is also very important, right? And so those equipment are also made available to communities in the event of an emergency. As long as they're trained and they know how to use it, then they can access those equipment along with a group of those rangers or the fire management program as well. So it's a lot, It's also about talking about the ideas of setting aside if they need to dispose of garbage, and in some communities people have no other choice but to actually burn,
Yeah.
but to establish like fire pits, establish a little community group so that they can be trained, that they can monitor, promote different practices like solid waste management, because that is also another big problem when it comes to fire. People, I guess we see it, sometimes we're embarrassed by it, but you drive through the country and you see garbage along the roads, along the forests. It's just communities don't have a proper solid waste management program. And so they dispose that along the roads, and some people even burn it. And then that creates another problem. So there's a lot. We do quite a bit, and you're right. We're kind of sandwiched between two big agricultural areas. And so it's quite challenging, but the only thing we can do is try to coordinate, build capacity within our institution, and then try to extend that outside.
I think you both documented the potential loss that can take place with just the natural environment, the natural resources we have, the threat it can have on homes, the threat it can have on your farming, on your farm if that's what you're into. But there's also some loss of biodiversity as well. Talk to us about that.
Well, maybe at the national level, Mr. Chun can comment to that. In terms of our area, we manage an area of a little over 100,000 acres now. So we pretty much, last year alone, we lost about 2,000 acres. So that's like 2% in the loss of the biodiversity or the forest itself. So that's a significant loss, and that happened even with a very with a strong management fire management presence on the ground, right? A dedicated group of about 10, 12, 15 rangers at any one time fighting fires almost every day. So I mean, you can look at that percentage. It can give you an overall look on what other areas are. But maybe Mr. Chun can comment in terms of what the loss was at the national level.
Yes, thanks, Raul. Yes, but Marlene, the fires actually have very significant impact on biodiversity and forests. It's not discriminate to any type of forest type or ecosystem type. It affects savanna, it affects grasslands, which are two of the most productive ecosystem types that we have in Belize. It affects the pine forest, and we are very reliant on the timber that comes from these types of forests. And last year, like I mentioned, we saw significant impact to the broadleaf forest, which actually have species that are not resistant to fire or that are not adaptable to fire, and we have. We have been observing in recent years, the significant tree kills that the fires have caused last year in the Chiquibul, in the Vaca, the forests around the Bangopani area or the central Belize area. Those are basically revenues or material that we could have used. It also affects the water retention capacity of the soil or of the forest, and that will basically affect water quality. But aside from that, it does affect the wildlife population. It has displaced species, especially arboreal species, and it has also affected the food to these animals. So it has great implications. It's something that we cannot really give a monetary value of, but
because it has implications far beyond. I thought of animals being trapped in fire, but I didn't think of their food source. That's a whole other dimension. Now, where are the particular hotspots? Where do you concentrate your efforts, knowing that perhaps there are going to be a number of forest fires that you will have to try to manage in the coming months?
Well, at least for for us, our efforts are concentrated in the mountain parish, the forest department. Most of our staff and resources actually are deployed at the mountain parish, but we do respond to fires outside of the mountain parish area. Like last year, we were basically operating in most districts. As you may know, we have the Bamapan Central Office. We have an office up at Douglas da Silva, Machaca in Toledo District, and Orangewack. We have an office there. So what we've done, or what we did last year, and we are basically improving on that, is the distribution of fire tools to these offices, so that those officers can lend support to organizations like CSFI, Machaca, Tide, and YCT. And the thing is, last year we saw the participation or the assistance coming from the south going to the west, where the YCT basically went to assist Benke, I think the community of Benke. But last year, at least on the fire maps that we generated, the hot spots were really in the north, around CSFI area, and also in Cayo District.
In the west.
We noted a lot of fires in the Vaca, Chiquibol area.
Yeah.
Central Belize, around Bamapan, and south.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, and I believe if I may interject, I believe everywhere there has been an increase or an expansion of agriculture. That's where there's been hotspots. I mean, at least in our case, and we saw the trend, because last year was, well, everybody remember, even everybody felt like the entire country, the entire region was burning up, and we were even having water bombing happening over Bangopan and all that sort of stuff. So the department and their hands really full. But with the expansion of agriculture, that it's really getting worse now, because agriculture has really been one of the causes of the increase in fires as well.
Yeah, and you said everybody remembers. I think that maybe it is such a distant memory, but the good part is we're having this conversation now where we can hopefully advise people of the threats if they are going to use fire, or they're going to expose wildland or areas that may be prone to fire as well. The other question I wanted to get some clarification on as we start to wrap it up is that you don't extinguish the fire. Fire management for forests, it's not about, you can't out the fire that's already burning, right?
No. Well,
it's
at least
managing.
for us, at least it is. You manage it, and that's why they call it's a fire management program.
Yeah.
And a lot of and the best way to manage these fires to begin with is to try to prevent it, obviously, right? And so there's basic practices that you have to do before you have a situation. So prevention is indeed better and much cheaper than cure, right? So it's about managing the fire, and even while you go about starting a fire, because sometimes you need fires, and especially in our system and in our culture in Belize, we're still very dependent on fire when it comes to land clearing. It's still a culture that exists. It's still very strong. So it's about managing it. You don't go in and fight the fire. There are particular areas that you will have to actually fight that fire, but you don't just run into a big blaze there and you think that, okay, you'll pay Superman and just put it out. It doesn't work like that. So it really starts from the very beginning before it even happens. It's managing it, and then you take it through a process, right? Yeah. And then it goes from there.
All right. Well, as you noted earlier, Raul, it is important for people to, if they are going to use fire for, let's say, land preparation for agriculture, they must contact the forest department.
For agriculture, you contact the agriculture department.
Agriculture department.
Using fires for forest management, you contact the forest department.
Okay.
If you observe an unattended or unmanaged fire in a forested area or protected area, you contact the forest department.
And if people want to get rid of waste?
If people want to get rid of waste, you contact the Department of Environment.
Okay. All right. Well, we do hope that we have given very early advice to people so that they can be considerate. We don't, when the fires get out of control and we start to have that unhealthy air, that's when we suddenly are concerned about forest fires, but the prevention is so important as well. So thank you very both for telling us all about the work that you do and helping us understand how we can reduce forest fires.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Marlene.
And we do want to note that this segment was brought to you by Red Plus through funding from the World Bank. And with that, we're going to go ahead and take our final break. And when we come back, we'll have our wrap-up, so stay tuned.